I'm Barbara, 67 years old, and I spent 40 years pinching pennies as a teacher to build my retirement nest egg. My daughter Diana, her husband Richard, and my teenage grandchildren Michael and Jessica had other plans for my money. They took a luxury vacation to France with $15,000 I thought was for emergency home repairs, leaving me alone on my birthday. What they didn't expect was that I'd finally had enough of their exploitation. If you're wondering where they live now, well, that's the best part of this story. Before I dive into how I turned the tables on my ungrateful family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to teach someone a hard lesson about taking advantage of your kindness. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. For 40 years, I taught 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary. I loved those children like they were my own, nurturing their curious minds and watching them grow. My classroom was always decorated with bright educational posters and student artwork. I spent countless evenings grading papers and planning lessons at my kitchen table, while my husband George worked late at his accounting firm. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable and responsible with our money. George and I had one daughter, Diana. We gave her everything we could afford: dance lessons, summer camps, and a college education without student loans. We wanted her to have the opportunities we didn't have growing up. Looking back, perhaps we gave her too much without teaching her the value of earning things for herself. When George passed away from pancreatic cancer 5 years ago, everything changed. The funeral was beautiful but heartbreaking. After 43 years of marriage, I found myself alone in our house, surrounded by memories and photographs. Diana was supportive at first, coming by with home-cooked meals and helping me organize George's paperwork. But once the life insurance policy paid out and she realized I was financially secure, her attitude shifted subtly. Diana is 45 now. With sleek brown hair she dyes to cover the gray and a perpetual look of mild dissatisfaction on her face. She married Richard 15 years ago, a charming man with expensive taste and poor impulse control. Richard works in real estate, though his income fluctuates wildly depending on the market. What remains constant is his gambling habit, which Diana pretends not to notice when they have to request loans from me to cover their mortgage. Their children, my grandchildren, were once sweet little ones who would cuddle on my lap for story time. Now Michael is 18, constantly glued to his gaming computer that I helped purchase for educational purposes. He barely acknowledges my presence when I visit, grunting responses without removing his headset. Jessica is 16, obsessed with her social media presence and the latest fashion trends that her parents can't afford, but somehow always manage to provide. After George died, I stayed in our 4-bedroom colonial in Oakwood Heights. The mortgage was paid off years ago, and the neighborhood had become increasingly desirable, with property values nearly doubling. The house was too big for just me, but it was filled with memories I wasn't ready to part with. The kitchen where George and I danced while making Sunday breakfast. The backyard where Diana took her first steps. The study where George and I would read together on quiet evenings. Diana suggested selling it immediately after the funeral. "It's too much house for you, Mom," she said, though I later realized she was eyeing the potential proceeds. I refused, and that's when the pattern began. First it was small things. Diana borrowing money for Michael's school trip, then Jessica's dental work not covered by insurance. Then came larger requests, help with their second car payment when Richard's commission was low, covering their property tax bill during a tight month. Each time I told myself I was helping my family, doing what George would have wanted. When Diana mentioned they were struggling to make their mortgage payment after Richard made a bad investment, gambling losses, I later discovered, I transferred $5,000 to their account. A week later, they took a weekend trip to Las Vegas that Diana accidentally revealed in a Facebook post she forgot I could see. After that, I tried setting boundaries. I explained that my retirement savings needed to last, and suggested they speak with a financial advisor about budgeting. Diana tearfully apologized, promising they'd be more responsible. 2 months later, they were back asking for help with Jessica's school tuition at an expensive private academy they'd enrolled her in without consulting me. Last winter I had a health scare, nothing serious in the end, but chest pains that warranted a trip to the emergency room. Diana was annoyed at being called during her book club meeting. Richard drove me to the hospital but spent the entire time in the waiting room on his phone, placing bets on a basketball game. The doctor diagnosed stress and minor angina, prescribing medication and suggesting I avoid stressful situations. Lying in that hospital bed, watching my family more concerned with their inconvenience than my health, something shifted inside me. I realized I had become nothing more than a financial resource to them. The thought broke my heart, but it also planted a seed of rebellion. I began to question why I continued allowing myself to be used this way. What would George say if he could see how they were treating me? The woman he had loved and respected for over 40 years, reduced to an ATM by the daughter we had raised together. I didn't act on these feelings immediately. Like many women of my generation, I was raised to put family first, to sacrifice for the greater good. But that seed continued to grow, watered by each thoughtless comment and selfish request. It would take one final betrayal to make it bloom. As April approached, I found myself looking forward to my 68th birthday. Since George passed, celebrations had been subdued affairs, but this year I hoped might be different. Diana had mentioned doing something special months earlier, and I allowed myself to imagine a family dinner, perhaps at the Italian restaurant George used to take me to on special occasions. Nothing extravagant, just time spent together, showing that despite our issues, we were still a family who cared for one another. 3 weeks before my birthday, Diana called with an urgent tone in her voice. She and Richard had discovered serious plumbing issues in their master bathroom. Water was leaking into the walls, causing damage to the flooring and potentially creating a mold hazard. The repairs would cost around $15,000, which they didn't have. "Mom, we wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency," Diana said, her voice cracking slightly. "The insurance won't cover it because Richard forgot to update the policy. We could lose the house if this isn't fixed properly." I hesitated, remembering my resolution to establish better boundaries. "That's a lot of money, Diana. What about a payment plan with the contractors? They want at least half up front to begin work," she explained. "And we need this fixed immediately before the damage spreads. Please, Mom. We'll pay you back when Richard closes his big commercial property deal next quarter." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The thought of my grandchildren without a home overrode my reservations. I transferred the money from my savings account the next day, receiving a flurry of grateful texts from Diana and a rare thank you call from Richard, who promised they'd make it up to me. A week later, I stopped by their house to drop off a casserole dish Diana had left at my home after our last family dinner. No one answered the doorbell, but Diana had given me a key years ago for emergencies. I let myself in, planning to leave the dish in the kitchen with a note. The house was quiet, with no sign of the supposed construction. Curious and increasingly suspicious, I walked upstairs to inspect the master bathroom. It was perfectly intact. No workers, no water damage, no sign of any plumbing issues whatsoever. Confused, I went back downstairs. On the kitchen counter sat Diana's laptop, still open. I wasn't in the habit of snooping, but something felt very wrong. I had just transferred $15,000 for emergency repairs that apparently didn't exist. I sat down at the laptop, which was open to Diana's email. The most recent message caught my eye immediately. A confirmation from Air France for 4 first-class tickets to Paris. The total, $12,842. The departure date was April 18th, 2 days before my birthday. My hands trembling, I clicked through more emails. There was a reservation for the Hotel Le Royal in Paris for 5 nights at €650 per night. A private wine tour of the Loire Valley. Dinner reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants. Shopping excursions planned for the Champs-Élysées. Every luxurious detail meticulously arranged with my money. The final confirmation email was for their return flight on April 26th, nearly a week after my birthday. They had planned this elaborate European vacation using the money I provided for their emergency, deliberately scheduling it to span my birthday. I sat in their kitchen, the betrayal washing over me in waves. It wasn't just the money, though that was significant. It was the calculated deception, the elaborate lie about home repairs, the manipulation of my concern for their well-being. But most painfully, it was the complete disregard for me as a mother, as a grandmother, as a person with feelings who might want to celebrate her birthday with the only family she had left. Over the next few days, I noticed Diana becoming increasingly evasive about my birthday. "We'll have to celebrate when things settle down," she said vaguely when I mentioned looking forward to spending the day together. We're just so busy with the house repairs and the kids' school activities. One evening when I came over for dinner, I overheard Diana in the kitchen with Richard, speaking in hushed tones. Mom won't know, she was saying. We'll tell her the repairs took longer than expected and cost more. She never checks up on these things. What about her birthday? Richard asked. She keeps bringing it up. I got her a gift card to that bookstore she likes. We'll drop it off with a card before we leave. She can treat herself to dinner or something. I stood frozen in the hallway, my daughter's casual dismissal of me like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized I was nothing more than a resource to be exploited, an afterthought to be managed with the minimum effort required. The day before they were set to leave, Diana stopped by briefly, ostensibly to update me on the repairs. She mentioned casually that they would be tied up on my birthday. We might not be able to call, she added, not quite meeting my eyes. The reception at the contractor's office building is terrible, but I left you a little something. She handed me an envelope. Don't open it until your birthday, okay? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After she left, I sat on my sofa, the envelope in my hands, containing what I now knew was a token gesture. A poor substitute for genuine care and consideration. The dam of emotions I had been holding back finally broke. I wept, not just for this betrayal but for years of being taken for granted. For becoming invisible except when my checkbook was needed. For the slow erosion of respect that had occurred so gradually I hardly noticed until it was gone completely. By the time my tears dried, something had changed within me. The sadness remained, but alongside it grew a steely resolve. If I was nothing but a financial resource to them, perhaps it was time they learned what life would be like without access to that resource. The morning of April 18th dawned sunny and clear, a beautiful spring day that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside me. From my bedroom window, I watched Diana's silver SUV pull into my driveway around 8:30. They were stopping by before heading to the airport, a brief courtesy visit that would allow them to pretend they weren't doing anything wrong. I composed myself, wiping away any trace of tears and straightening my cardigan. When I opened the door, Diana was standing there with a forced smile, designer sunglasses perched on her head. Behind her, Richard waited in the running car with Michael and Jessica, all of them glued to their phones. Just wanted to check on you before we head out to meet with the contractors, Diana said, the lie flowing effortlessly from her lips. They're finally making progress on the bathroom. That's good to hear, I replied, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. I was beginning to worry. Diana glanced at her watch impatiently. We should have everything resolved by the time we get back. The project manager says they need us on site for some decisions about the fixtures and materials. All of you? I asked, gesturing toward Richard and the kids in the car. Oh, you know how Richard is with these things, she said dismissively. And the kids have spring break activities with their friends afterward. The ease with which she fabricated these details was almost impressive. I wondered how many times she had lied to me over the years, how many stories I had accepted without question because I never imagined my own daughter would deceive me so thoroughly. Diana leaned in for a quick, perfunctory hug. We'll make it up to you when we get back, she promised, the same empty words she always used. Maybe we can do a belated birthday dinner or something. I nodded, allowing her to believe I remained oblivious. Drive safely, I said, watching as she hurried back to the waiting car. They pulled away without a backward glance, embarking on their luxury vacation, while leaving me behind with a casual wave and empty promises. Back inside, the house felt cavernous and silent. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects and photographs that suddenly seemed to belong to another life. In the kitchen, I made a cup of tea and sat at the table where George and I had shared countless meals, where we had discussed our days and made plans for our future. What would you do, George? I whispered to the empty chair across from me. For a moment I could almost hear his response, his voice firm but gentle. Enough is enough, Barb. You deserve better than this. 2 days later, on the morning of my 68th birthday, I awoke to an empty house and a handful of generic text messages from acquaintances who had been notified by Facebook's birthday reminder. Nothing from Diana or the family, of course. They would be settling into their Parisian hotel by now, Perhaps enjoying croissants at a sidewalk cafe or planning their shopping expedition on my dime. Around noon, I decided to open the envelope Diana had left. Inside was a birthday card with cartoon balloons and a pre-printed message about making the day special. Diana had scrawled, "Happy birthday, Mom," underneath, with Richard's signature added as an afterthought. Tucked inside was a $50 gift card to a chain bookstore. $50 after I had given them $15,000. The pathetic token of acknowledgement broke something in me. I sank onto the sofa, the card falling from my trembling hands. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable. I cried for the lonely woman I had become, for the family that saw me as nothing but a financial resource, for the years I had spent enabling their entitlement rather than demanding the respect I deserved. When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollow but somehow lighter, as if I had purged something toxic from my system. I picked up my phone and called Margaret, my oldest friend from my teaching days, the one person who had consistently seen through Diana's manipulations. "They did what?" Margaret exclaimed after I explained the situation, her voice crackling with indignation over the phone. "Using your money to go to France while leaving you alone on your birthday? Barbara, that's beyond disrespectful. It's cruel." "I know," I said quietly. "I think I've always known they were using me, but I didn't want to see it. I kept making excuses, telling myself that's what mothers do. They sacrifice for their children." "There's a difference between sacrifice and exploitation," Margaret replied firmly. "George would be furious if he could see how they're treating you." As Margaret spoke, memories surfaced of other betrayals I had minimized or excused over the years. The time Diana and Richard used money I had given them for property taxes to buy a hot tub. The Christmas when they gave me bath salts while wearing designer clothes and watches I had indirectly financed. The countless family gatherings where my opinions were dismissed, my boundaries ignored, and my generosity taken as an entitlement rather than a gift. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, though a plan was already taking shape in my mind. "Yes, you do," Margaret said, knowing me too well. "You're just afraid to do it. But Barbara, if you don't stand up for yourself now, when will you? You've spent your entire life caring for others, your students, George, Diana, and her family. When do you start putting yourself first?" Her words resonated with something deep inside me, a voice that had been whispering for years, but that I had stubbornly ignored. I was 68 years old, with perhaps 20 good years left if I was fortunate. Did I want to spend them as an ATM for people who couldn't even be bothered to celebrate my birthday? "You're right," I said, a new resolve strengthening my voice. "It's time for things to change." After ending the call with Margaret, I sat in my living room as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a prison of memories and obligations. I looked around at the furniture George and I had carefully selected, the photographs on the walls chronicling a family life that no longer existed except in my imagination. In that moment of clarity, I made my decision. If Diana and her family valued my money more than my presence in their lives, then perhaps it was time to show them exactly what life would be like without either. The next morning, I called Amanda Fisher, a lawyer who had helped me with George's estate. She had always been straightforward with me, and I trusted her judgment. Her secretary put me through immediately when I mentioned it was urgent. "Barbara, it's good to hear from you," Amanda said warmly. "What can I help you with today?" "I need to know my options regarding my house," I explained, then outlined the situation with Diana and the family. Amanda listened without interruption, making occasional notes. "Let me be clear about this," she said when I finished. "The house is solely in your name, correct? Diana isn't on the deed or mortgage in any capacity." "That's right. George and I paid it off completely 10 years ago. The deed is only in my name since his passing." "Then legally, you have every right to sell it without consulting Diana or anyone else," Amanda confirmed. "It's your property to do with as you wish. But Barbara, are you sure this is what you want to do? Selling a home is a significant decision, especially one with so many memories." "I've given it a lot of thought," I assured her, though in truth the plan had crystallized only hours before. "This house is too big for just me, and maintaining it takes too much of my retirement savings. More importantly, I need to establish clear boundaries with my family, and this seems like the most effective way to do that. Amanda was silent for a moment, then said, I understand. If you're certain, I can recommend a good real estate agent who specializes in quick sales. He's helped several of my clients who needed to liquidate property assets rapidly. By that afternoon, I was sitting across from Thomas Jenkins, a real estate agent with 30 years of experience in our area. Unlike the younger agents Diana had periodically suggested to help me downsize, Thomas didn't talk down to me or use confusing jargon. The market in Oakwood Heights is extremely competitive right now, Thomas explained, reviewing comparable sales in the neighborhood. Your 4-bedroom colonial with the updated kitchen and that beautiful sunroom addition could easily list for $575,000. If we price it aggressively at $550,000, we could potentially spark a bidding war. How quickly could it sell? I asked, mindful of the family's return date. Thomas considered this. In this market, with your home's features and location, we could have multiple offers within days of listing. But if speed is your primary concern, I have another option. He explained that he knew a developer who had been buying properties in the area to renovate and flip. They pay all cash and can close in as little as a week. The trade-off is they typically offer slightly below market value. But there's no need for open houses, multiple showings, or the uncertainty of buyer financing falling through. What kind of offer might they make? I asked. Based on recent purchases, probably around $520,000. But I might be able to negotiate up to $540,000, given the condition of your home and the neighborhood comps. I considered this. The speed and certainty of the developer's cash offer appealed to me, even with the slight reduction in price. Let's explore that option, I decided. Thomas made a call on the spot, describing my property to the developer. To my surprise, they expressed immediate interest and offered to come see the house that same day. By evening, I had a cash offer of $545,000 with a 7-day closing period. The developer had been particularly interested in the large lot size and the potential to add a significant extension. After consulting briefly with Amanda, I accepted the offer. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. I methodically went through each room, sorting my possessions into 3 categories: items to keep, family heirlooms that rightfully belonged to Diana despite her behavior, and everything else to be donated. I was surprised by how liberating it felt to systematically detach myself from decades of accumulated possessions. The formal dining set we rarely used, the guest bedroom furniture, Richard's large-screen television he had installed in the basement man cave, when they briefly lived with me after college, all of it suddenly seemed like unnecessary weight tying me down. I called several local charities and arranged for pickup of furniture, clothing, and household goods. I took particular satisfaction in donating Michael's gaming setup and Jessica's extensive collection of barely worn designer clothes. These were items I had directly or indirectly financed, but that they had left carelessly at my house, expecting everything to remain untouched in their absence. The only items I carefully packed were truly meaningful personal possessions. George's favorite books, our wedding album, the hand-quilted blanket my mother had made, photographs and letters that chronicled our life together. These treasures filled surprisingly few boxes. While the house was being emptied, I searched for a new place to live. After considering various options, I found a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in the Lakeview, a modern complex for active seniors overlooking Crystal Lake. The monthly rent was reasonable given my financial situation, especially after the house sale, and the amenities included a fitness center, community garden, and weekly social activities. I signed a 1-year lease and arranged for my remaining possessions to be moved directly there after the house closing. I also opened a new account at a different bank, transferring most of my savings except for what remained in the joint account Diana could access. I left exactly $50 there, the same amount as the bookstore gift card she had given me for my birthday. As the closing date approached, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness at leaving the home where George and I had built our life, anxiety about the confrontation to come, but primarily a growing sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I was making decisions solely for my own benefit rather than sacrificing my needs for others who didn't appreciate it. The night before closing, I walked through the nearly empty house one last time. In each room, I said a silent goodbye to the memories it contained. In our bedroom, I whispered, "I think you'd approve of this, George. It's time for me to stand up for myself." I could almost feel his reassuring presence, supporting my decision. The next morning, I signed the closing documents in Amanda's office, officially transferring ownership of my family home to the developer. When the proceeds were wired to my new account, I felt a momentous shift, as if I had reclaimed not just my financial independence, but my dignity as well. As I collected the last of my personal items from the house, my phone began buzzing with text notifications. Diana, unable to reach me at the house phone she had been calling, was finally trying my cell. "Mom, are you okay? The neighbors said there are moving trucks at your house. Call me immediately." I silenced the phone without responding. Let them wonder, I thought. Let them experience a fraction of the anxiety and uncertainty they had so casually inflicted on me. That evening, I settled into my new apartment, arranging the few cherished possessions I had brought with me. The space was smaller but brighter, with large windows overlooking the lake. As the sun set over the water, casting golden reflections across my new living room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. The week after closing on the house was transformative. While Diana and her family continued their luxury vacation in France, blissfully unaware of the changes occurring at home, I embraced my new beginning. I hired professional movers to transport my carefully curated possessions to the apartment. The men were efficient and respectful, treating my treasured items with care. As they arranged my furniture in the new space, I felt a sense of ownership and control that had been missing for too long. "Where would you like this bookshelf, Mrs. Wilson?" asked one of the movers, holding George's antique oak shelf that had housed his collection of historical biographies. "By the window, please," I directed. "It gets the best light there for reading." Making these simple decisions without considering anyone else's preferences was surprisingly liberating. For years, even in my own home, I had unconsciously prioritized Diana's opinions about decor and arrangement, wanting to make the space welcoming for her visits that became increasingly rare unless she needed something. After the movers left, I spent the afternoon organizing my new kitchen. The compact space was actually more convenient than my former sprawling kitchen, with everything within easy reach. I arranged my favorite cookware and the special tea set George had given me for our 40th anniversary, imagining the future mornings I would spend enjoying the sunrise over the lake. The next day, I watched from my balcony as 3 donation trucks arrived at my former house. I had coordinated with the developer to allow charity organizations to collect the remaining furniture, electronics, and clothing before demolition began. There was a certain poetic justice in seeing Jessica's expensive clothing and Michael's gaming equipment being loaded into the Goodwill truck, items they had taken for granted now going to people who would genuinely appreciate them. I had been meticulous in documenting everything I owned versus what belonged to family members who had left their possessions in my home. I created a detailed inventory with photographs, which Amanda assured me would protect me legally if Diana tried to claim I had disposed of their property unlawfully. Items that were genuinely Diana's childhood mementos and family heirlooms had been carefully packed and placed in a small storage unit, with the first 3 months paid in advance. I mailed the key and access information to Diana's home address, where it would be waiting when they returned. With my new living arrangements settled, I focused on creating the life I wanted rather than the one Diana and her family had relegated me to. I used a small portion of the house proceeds to furnish the few empty spaces in my apartment. I purchased a comfortable reading chair I had always wanted but had denied myself, thinking the expense frivolous. I bought new bedding in colors I loved rather than the neutral tones Diana had always insisted were more tasteful. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I had expressed interest in for years, but had never pursued because family obligations always took precedence. I joined the residence committee at the Lakeview and signed up for their weekly bridge club, eager to meet new people who might become genuine friends. 5 days into my new life, my phone exploded with notifications. Diana had been trying to reach me at the house, growing increasingly concerned when neighbors reported unusual activity. Her texts progressed from mildly concerned to frantic. "Mom, please call me. Mrs. Johnson next door says there are strangers in your house. Are you okay? Mom, this isn't funny. Call me immediately. We're worried sick. If you don't call in the next hour, I'm contacting the police to do a welfare check. The final message made me laugh out loud. Now they were worried about my welfare? After abandoning me on my birthday to vacation with money obtained through deception? I sent a brief, calm reply. I'm fine. Enjoy the rest of your trip. We'll talk when you return. This only triggered a barrage of additional messages and calls, which I silently let go to voicemail. Richard even tried calling, his voice uncharacteristically urgent as he demanded to know what was happening. I listened to the messages with detached interest, noting how their concern seemed centered not on my well-being, but on the unexpected disruption to the status quo they had established. As Diana's vacation came to an end, I settled into a peaceful routine in my new home. Each morning I enjoyed coffee on my balcony, watching the sunrise over the lake. I spent afternoons exploring the community amenities or attending classes. In the evenings I read books I had always meant to get to or chatted with my new neighbors in the community lounge. Barbara from apartment 3C invited me to join her walking group that circled the lake each morning. John and Patricia from the 5th floor included me in their weekly dinner rotation, where residents took turns hosting small gatherings. For the first time in years, I was developing friendships based on mutual enjoyment rather than obligation or history. The night before Diana's family was scheduled to return from France, I received a final desperate voicemail. Diana's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Mom, we're flying home tomorrow. Something is clearly wrong and you're not telling us what. The neighbors said all your furniture is gone, and there are construction vehicles at the house. Please call me back. I didn't return the call. Instead, I slept peacefully in my new bed, the sound of gentle waves on the lakeshore drifting through my open window. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation I had been preparing for, but tonight I would enjoy the calm before the storm, secure in the knowledge that I had finally taken control of my own life. Diana's flight was scheduled to arrive at 2 in the afternoon. By 4:30, my phone indicated 6 missed calls from her number and 4 from Richard's. I knew they must have arrived home, or rather to what used to be home, and discovered the truth. I turned my ringer back on and waited. At 5:15 there was an aggressive pounding on my apartment door. Through the peephole I could see Diana and Richard standing in the hallway, both red-faced and agitated. Diana's carefully highlighted hair was disheveled, and Richard's normally smooth demeanor had given way to visible anger. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. What have you done? Diana burst out before I could even greet them. She pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes wild as she took in my new surroundings. Where is all our stuff? Why is there a construction crew at the house? Mom, what is going on? Richard followed her in, his face darkening as he surveyed the apartment. Barbara, you had better start explaining. Right now. I closed the door calmly and gestured to the living area. Please sit down. Would either of you like some tea? There. Diana nearly shrieked. We come home to find strangers living in our house, all our possessions gone, and you're offering tea? Have you lost your mind? Not your house, I corrected gently, taking a seat in my new armchair. My house. And now it belongs to Eastbrook Developers. They made a very fair offer. The color drained from both their faces as the implication of my words sank in. You sold the house? Richard stammered. Without telling us? Without discussing it with family? Yes, I replied simply. Just like you took a luxury vacation to France with my money without telling me. Without discussing it with family. Diana's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. That's completely different. We were going to pay you back for the repairs. There were no repairs, Diana, I said quietly. I saw the bathroom. I saw the email confirmations for your first-class flights and 5-star hotel. You lied to me to finance your vacation. A vacation deliberately scheduled over my birthday, so you wouldn't have to bother celebrating it. Diana had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. Okay, so we weren't entirely truthful about the money. But to sell the family home in retaliation? That's extreme and cruel. Where are we supposed to stay when we visit? Where are all our things? Your childhood mementos and genuine family heirlooms are in a storage unit, I said, retrieving an envelope from the side table and handing it to her. Here's the key and access information. As for your other possessions, Michael's gaming equipment, Jessica's designer clothes, Richard's entertainment system. Those have been donated to charity. Donated? Richard exploded. Do you have any idea how much that equipment cost? The television alone was worth thousands. About $50 worth, I'd estimate, I replied calmly. The same value you placed on my birthday with that gift card. Diana collapsed onto the sofa, tears beginning to stream down her face. I can't believe you would do this to your own family. After everything we've been through together. Mom, how could you? The same way you could use me as your personal bank for years, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. The same way you could lie to my face about needing money for emergency repairs while planning a luxury European vacation. The same way you could leave me alone on my birthday without a second thought. We're going to fight this, Richard declared, pulling out his phone. I'm calling a lawyer right now. You can't just dispose of our property without permission. Actually, I can, I said. I have detailed documentation of everything that belonged to me versus items you left in my home. Amanda Fisher has copies of everything, including photographs. You're welcome to consult your own attorney. But she assures me my actions were entirely legal. At the mention of Amanda's name, Richard faltered. He knew her reputation as one of the best lawyers in town. As for the house, I continued, it was solely in my name. I had every legal right to sell it without consulting anyone. The proceeds have been deposited in an account only I can access. Diana's tears turned to anger. So that's it? You've cut us off completely? Your own daughter and grandchildren. I've removed myself as your ATM, I corrected. I haven't cut you off as family. That choice will be yours. Michael and Jessica chose that moment to appear at the door, which Diana had left ajar in her haste. They looked shell-shocked, having presumably just come from the former house. Grandma! Jessica's voice was small, her social media confidence nowhere in evidence. Is it true? Did you really sell the house and get rid of all our stuff? Come in, I said gently. Despite everything, I still loved my grandchildren, even if they had been raised to see me primarily as a source of financial support rather than a person with feelings. Michael stormed in, less restrained than his sister. My entire gaming setup is gone? Do you know how much time I invested in those games? All my progress, my accounts. Approximately as much time as I invested in building a relationship with you that you barely acknowledged unless you wanted something, I replied. Yes, the gaming equipment has been donated to children who will appreciate it. This is insane, Michael declared, looking to his parents for support. She can't just do this, can she? Apparently she can, Richard said bitterly. Your grandmother has decided her revenge is more important than her family. This isn't about revenge, I corrected him. It's about consequences and boundaries. For years, I've allowed all of you to treat me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. That ends today. Diana stood up, wiping angrily at her tears. So what now? You expect us to just accept this and move on? Pretend you haven't destroyed our relationship. I didn't destroy our relationship, Diana. You did that when you decided my birthday was less important than your vacation plans. When you lied to me about needing money for emergency repairs. When you taught your children that it's acceptable to use people rather than respect them. But we're family, she protested weakly. Yes, we are, I agreed. And family should be built on love and mutual respect, not exploitation. If you want to have a relationship with me going forward, it will be on different terms. I won't be financing your lifestyle anymore. I won't be available at your convenience and ignored when you don't need something from me. I won't be an afterthought. The room fell silent as my words sank in. Richard looked as though he wanted to continue arguing, but seemed to realize it would be futile. Michael slouched against the wall, his expression a mixture of shock and resentment. Jessica sat on the edge of the sofa, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Diana was the first to speak again. I don't even know who you are anymore, she said quietly. The mother I knew would never have done something like this. The mother you knew allowed herself to be taken advantage of because she thought that's what love meant, I replied. I've realized it doesn't. Real love includes boundaries and respect. Come on, Richard said to Diana and the kids. There's clearly no reasoning with her right now. We need to figure out what to do about our things. and where we're going to stay when we visit. You're welcome to stay at a hotel, I suggested. There are several nice ones near the lake. Richard's parting glare could have frozen water, but I remained unmoved. As they filed out of my apartment, Diana paused at the door. This isn't over, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. You're right, I agreed. It's just beginning. On new terms. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment, watching the sunset cast golden light across the lake. The confrontation had been difficult but necessary. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself, refused to be manipulated, and demanded the respect I deserved. Whatever happened next, I knew I would never go back to being the convenient ATM they had taken for granted for so long. The weeks following the confrontation were silent ones. Diana and her family made no attempt to contact me, and I allowed them the space to process what had happened. I knew that any meaningful reconciliation would require time and reflection on both sides. Meanwhile, I focused on building my new life. I continued with my watercolor classes, discovering a talent I never knew I possessed. My instructor, a retired art teacher named Eleanor, praised my eye for color and encouraged me to enter a piece in the community art show. To my surprise, my painting of the lake at sunrise received an honorable mention. I joined the resident book club and found myself engaged in stimulating discussions about literature and ideas, conversations that stretched my mind in ways family gatherings never had. I volunteered at the local elementary school's reading program, using my teaching experience to help struggling readers, finding purpose in contributing to my new community. Some days were harder than others. Despite their treatment of me, I missed my family. There were moments when I doubted my decision, when the silence of my apartment felt more like loneliness than peace. During these times, I reminded myself of the birthday I had spent alone while they enjoyed France on my dime. I recalled years of being taken for granted, of having my boundaries ignored and my generosity exploited. The doubt would recede, replaced by renewed conviction that I had done what was necessary. 3 months after the confrontation, I received a text from Diana. Can we talk? We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop midway between our homes. Diana arrived looking more subdued than I had seen her in years, the designer handbag and carefully coordinated outfit replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. You look well, she said after we had ordered our drinks. The apartment seems to agree with you. It does, I confirmed. I've made friends there. I'm painting again, something I always wanted to do but never made time for. Diana nodded, turning her coffee cup in her hands. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About how we treated you. About what kind of daughter I've been. She paused, visibly struggling with her words. I was wrong, Mom. What we did with the money, lying about the repairs, planning the vacation over your birthday. It was selfish and cruel. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did. Her acknowledgement surprised me. I had expected defensiveness or attempts to minimize their behavior, not the straightforward admission of wrongdoing. What brought this on? I asked. Therapy, actually, Diana admitted with a small smile. Richard and I have been going. After the shock wore off, we realized we needed to examine why we thought it was acceptable to treat you that way. And the kids, they've had some hard lessons too. Michael had to get a part-time job to start saving for new gaming equipment. Jessica's learning to shop on a budget instead of expecting designer everything. These sound like valuable life lessons, I observed. They are, Diana agreed. Painful but necessary. We've all been so entitled for so long, expecting you to fund our lifestyle while giving nothing in return. It took losing everything to make us see what we were doing. We talked for nearly 2 hours more honestly than we had in years. Diana explained how she and Richard had fallen into patterns of financial irresponsibility, always assuming I would bail them out. She acknowledged how they had taken my love and generosity for granted, treating me as a resource rather than a person with needs and feelings of her own. I'm not asking to go back to how things were, Diana clarified as our meeting drew to a close. I know that relationship wasn't healthy for any of us, but I'd like to try building something new. Something based on mutual respect. If you're willing. I considered her words carefully. I'd like that too, I finally said. But it will take time. And there will be boundaries. I understand, she nodded. We'll take it slow. Over the following months, we began rebuilding our relationship one careful step at a time. Diana and Richard attended financial counseling to address their spending habits and Richard's gambling. Michael and Jessica, initially resentful, gradually came to understand the lessons behind my actions. The first time they visited my new apartment as a family, I noticed subtle changes. They arrived on time, brought a homemade dish to share rather than expecting me to provide everything, and each of them had made an effort to engage me in genuine conversation rather than performative affection followed by requests for money. Jessica asked about my painting, showing actual interest in something that mattered to me. Michael, though still somewhat distant, helped set the table without being asked and inquired about the book I was reading. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Richard had found steady work with a respectable real estate firm and seemed committed to more responsible financial management. Diana had taken a part-time job at a local boutique, contributing to their household income for the first time in years. We're living within our means now, she told me during that visit. It's not always easy, but it's actually less stressful than constantly worrying about how to cover the next expense. I maintained my boundaries firmly but fairly. When they asked if they could stay in my guest room during an upcoming visit, I agreed but made it clear this was a visit, not an open invitation to treat my home as their own. When Michael hinted about needing money for college expenses, I offered to help him research scholarship opportunities instead. Through this process of rebuilding, I learned valuable lessons about myself as well. I recognized how my own behavior had enabled their entitlement, how my reluctance to establish and maintain boundaries had contributed to the unhealthy dynamic. I learned that true generosity comes from love, not obligation, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to allow them to experience the consequences of their actions. On my 69th birthday, almost a year after the events that had changed everything, Diana arranged a small celebration at their home. Unlike the elaborate parties they had sometimes thrown to showcase their affluence to friends, this was a simple, thoughtful gathering. They had prepared my favorite foods, chosen gifts that reflected knowledge of my actual interests rather than token gestures, and most importantly, made me feel valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. As I blew out the candles on my cake, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain and betrayal had been real, the confrontation necessary and difficult. But from that difficult moment had grown something unexpected, a healthier, more authentic family relationship built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand the respect you deserve. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to say no more to patterns of behavior that diminish your dignity and self-worth. What about you? Have you ever had to take drastic measures to establish boundaries with loved ones who took advantage of your generosity? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your self-respect and teach others how to treat you properly. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to stand firm in your own worth.